Thank you, Warren. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, what we're going to do now is, in part two, I'm going to address the same two topics, but in reverse order, with the emphasis on Me Too. And it's a little bit boy crisis, and then emphasis on Me Too. And we're going to address them from the perspective of return to Eros. And you'll see that there are kind of deep and profound, you okay, love? Deep and profound overlapping, and yet we're going to enter into completely different doors, which is exactly what we're going to do in the think tank. So let's just kind of shake our arms around a little bit, just to kind of stretch out. Just kind of shake up a little bit. Azaza. Okay. Azaza, azaza. Away we go. So I'm going to start with the boy crisis, or the school shootings, and that topic. Speak very shortly about that, right? Just 3 core points, and then really kind of step into the Me Too question, which is absolutely critical at the same time. The experience of a human being is that if I don't have something in the world which calls me, if I don't have something in the world which requires my attention, if I don't experience myself as being fundamentally needed, if I'm not needed in a core way, then I die. We have an enormous amount of neuroscience on it. We have partners who are together, right? One partner passes, right? The other partner, if they can't create, right, a framework in which they're genuinely needed in the world, and I can't experience myself as being needed, so then we have a whole bunch of longitudinal studies, but fairly quickly afterwards, right, I pass from the world. So the experience, the need to be needed, right, is a fundamental human need. And it's not a contrivance, right? It's not a function of social, psychological, or cultural conditioning. Right? It's actually part of the essential quality of being human. In other words, what we're intuiting is not a social construction. Sorry about that, Tom. Word construction. Right? It's not a social construction, right? But it's actually a genuine sense of identity. Because actually, reality intended me. Uniqueness is an indication, right, that reality wanted there to be oleliness. Right? When we heard this afternoon, Nassim talking about the billion chemical reactions that have to take place uniquely within a structure of 100 trillion cells, dancing in utterly unique complementarity. Meaning, uniqueness is I've got a unique atomic signature, which is enormously well developed. I have a unique cellular signature, which is enormously well developed, which is if you would put my immune system and Warren's immune system on an overhead screen, right, there would be certain commonalities. His is really hot, right? But besides that, right, they're actually enormously different, right? You can actually see this dazzling, complex, stunning signature of reality on Warrenness. Cellular signature, atomic signature, organic signature, right? Uniqueness is a core structure of reality, and reality intends uniqueness because it's telling us that you're not extra, right? Reality is having a Peter experience. Peter's not extra. No one else can actually live that experience, and no one can give that gift, right? No one can write that poem. No one can sing that song. No one can be that quality of intimacy, right? No one can laugh that way. No one can create presence in a room that way, right? No one has that unique perspective which emerges from my particular place in the space-time continuum. So that quality of being needed, right, is not social, psychological, and cultural conditioning, right? It's innate to human essence. Now, when I'm fundamentally needed, that creates in me a sense of duty and honor. And the sense of duty and honor is something paradoxically that actually our liberal world in many, many different ways has lost, right? We've actually multiplied options, but we actually hold obligation as an anathema. The notion I should be obligated to something, right, is fundamentally opposition, right, to a very, very superficial sense of freedom. But although we may want to throw off external obligation, And we may have done, 30 years of therapy intensely several times a week, right, to throw off the obligations that we feel that our parents foisted upon us. And that might be a legitimate process of actually coming into myself, perhaps. But actually, the sense of obligation in the original Hebrew, the word love and obligation are the same word, chovah and chiba. Isn't that beautiful? The word love and obligation are the same word. Because actually, when I actually know my own identity, I realize I'm a unique configuration of the love intelligence and love beauty. That is the initiating and animating eros of all that is, right? And you know the sentences that live in me, as me, and through me. And as such, I've got a unique expression that I can actually give to the world that's fundamentally needed by reality. And the premise of a unique self-symphony is that there's no jealousy, right? You get that? And as I can meet Warren, and I don't say, wow, why didn't I write The Myth of Male Power? Not mine to write. It's not mine to do. That's a very big deal, right? So I get to be in devotion, excited, delighted by Warrenness, right? And so all of a sudden, right, one of the three major forces that cause rivalrous relationships is jealousy. All of a sudden, jealousy disappears. I couldn't give Zach's talk this morning. Not in a million years. It's his talk to give, right? And then we get to be delighted about each other, right? And if you could feel, we said one of the qualities of forming a unique self-symphony, trust, right, delight. We got to be delighted by each other. Right? We got to be devoted. The third was devotion, right? This experience of devotion to each other. Now, what have we done? And I track this for a second. And this is part of the job of the think tank, is to actually identify the root core structures and then actually retell a story in culture, right? Re-narrate identity in a sense that addresses, right, this tragic crisis, right, for young men and women, but particularly in a particular expression it appears for boys, which is, we've actually denuded ourselves of a sense of duty and honor, a sense of obligation. There's nothing that I'm obligated to do. There's nothing that gives me duty and honor, right? We talked about earlier today the tragic expression of duty and honor, right? French and German men shooting each other, right, over 4 years, killing 6 million people, right, in World War I. But what drove them was duty and honor. Now, we needed to deconstruct that duty and honor because it was a false sense of duty and honor. It was based on a kind of created, politically constructed, right, decadent, corrupt nationalism, for sure. But what we need to do is then, right, reconstruct. We need to recreate, right, a new sense of duty and honor, right, a sense that actually, right, as a young man, I grew up and I realized the evolutionary impulse is pulsing in me personally and uniquely. And there's something I can give to the world. There's a way that I can be, love, laugh, sing, play, right, that no one else that ever was, is, or will be can do other than me. And it's not about public performance. You get that? It's not about performance. It's not about the male who's got to perform. It's about my very beingness, right? And it may be a private contribution. It may be within the realm of family. It may be in my very beingness as a young man is a unique contribution. And if I don't know that I'm uniquely needed, and that reality intended me, and that reality desires me, and reality needs me, then we're raising a generation of men without any calling to duty and any calling to honor, without any sense of their unique self. And my purpose emerges not from a socially constructed Myers-Briggs, what's my Myers-Briggs specialty, what's my unique talent, right? My unique self, right, Peter was talking this afternoon, my unique self is not my unique talent. Let's get that straight. My unique talent may be an expression of my unique self, but my unique self is the unique quality of reality that's being shown. One expression of it might be my particular set of proclivities and gifts. But my unique self is not the unique talent of my separate self. It's the unique expression of essence living as me. And we've robbed boys of that. Now, if you don't think that's going to create a boys' crisis, right, you got something coming. Of course it is. Right? What else could it possibly do? Right? And so we've got to actually go back and reclaim notions of duty, notions of honor, right? Notions of obligation. And there's nothing more exciting and just delightful to know that I'm needed. Right? I'm needed. Right? Reality couldn't make it without Sherwood. There's something Sherwood's going to do, be, love, right? Express, incarnate in the world, right? That Sally can't do. And Sally, right? And there's two Sallys here, Sally and then Sally, right? There's Sally sitting in front of you and then Sally behind, right? And those Sallys can't do the same thing, right? I couldn't write Awakening Shakti. I couldn't write Sally behind, right? Book on Adnam's book on creativity, right? And reality needs that book. And every human being has an inalienable right to know that they're needed and to know that's part of their innate dignity. Right? And when we rob people of that fundamental dignity, we destroy the inner fabric of their identity. And so that's the core thing I just want to say about the crisis around men. We've robbed men of the dignity of responsibility. And once we do that, it's over. So that's one. Let me now move to Me Too. Short, right, on the boy crisis. I'm going to spend a little more time on Me Too because it's wildly important, and there's some things that just need to be said. Some of them are a little bit controversial because actually talking about this topic in general is often a no-win, right? It's a hard topic. So Warren, why don't you go? Okay, so let me just talk about it, right? Let me just say a couple of things here that actually just need to be said. So let me start this way. You know, those of us who know each other, and some people are here are new that I haven't met, but those of us who know each other, there's a couple of jokes that I like, right, about sexuality, right, that actually kind of capture something. So y'all remember Isaac Bashevis Singer, right, wrote a book called The Slave. We have a rule here, by the way. When we mention a book, even if we don't know it, if we ask people if they do, everyone kind of nods their head, right, because it makes the room kind of, let's try it again. Isaac Bashevis Singer, remember him, right? Right, won the Nobel. That's much better. Awesome. What a room, right? So Isaac Bashevis Singer was a wonderful Nobel, writer, and I knew for a short time, right, the couple, she was his assistant. So she shared with us that Isaac Bashevis Singer had a favorite joke, right? And the way this joke went, and he liked it for a bunch of reasons, but basically it's about only a Jewish person can tell this joke. Don't try and tell us if you're not Jewish. It just won't go well for you, right? But basically, right, there's this man, and he says to his son, in a slight Yiddish accent, and you'll understand all the Jewish neurosis and edible problems that come out of this joke. It's why Singer liked the joke. He says to his son, Gewalt geschrigen, right? It means like Gewalt, like, oh my God, like, I think Mama is cheating on me. Son says, like, why are you talking to me about that, right? Like, why, like, hello, Dad, right? Like, hello. And he says, you know what I want you to do? Like, it says, honor your mother and father. I'm going to go away, right? I need you to watch Mama and tell me what happens. Now, the son's, like, mortified, right? Are you for real, right? But, his father says, like, what could he do, right? So goes away, comes back, and there's a major Jewish word you need to know. It's an important word, which is new. New is basically, it gets you through everything. You can have like two brothers who haven't met each other for 10 years. They meet in an elevator. One says to the other, new. One says, new. They get off the elevator, don't see each other for another 10 years. So new is a very important word. So if you're ever hanging out with Jewish people, just say new, and everyone will know you're kind of part of the tribe, okay? So the father comes home and says, what does he say? Everyone together? New, right? New, like, was tutzach, like, what happened? So the son says, he's just looking mortified. He says, Tata, I've got really bad news. He says, new? Was tutzach, like, what happened? He says, like, as soon as you left, this very big, strong man, right, came and knocked on the door, and Mama opened and gave him a big smile and a big hug. Oy vey, says the father, like, oy vey, it's terrible, right? But the father says, new? What happened? Mama, Tat, did you really want me to tell you? He says, new? You've got to tell me. He says, well, Mama brought him in, sat him on the couch, and then went and gave him your favorite herring, right, in gefilte fish. Does anyone know what gefilte fish is? Gefilte fish may be a legitimate source of anti-Semitism, actually, but gefilte fish is a problem. So get your gefilte fish, right? Like, oh my God, Mama gave someone my gefilte fish? It's terrible. So he says, no, what happened? He says, Tata, I can't tell. They were on the couch and they were like kissing and, Gewalt, it's terrible. Oy vey, what happened next? He says, well, they went into the bedroom and they shut the door, but knew what happened next. Well, you told me to watch, Tata, so I watched, and they took their clothes off. And the father says, knew what happened next? The son says, I don't know, the lights went off. And the father says, oi, the doubt will kill me. So that was Bashevis Singer's favorite joke, our Nobel laureate about sexuality, right? And his point is, this is the story we lie about, right? This is the story where denial reigns, right? Denial is the order of the day. Lying is the order of the day, right? So this is the topic that we don't actually engage. So we're just going to engage it for a few minutes here and just talk about kind of what's going on. What's the root? And I want to look at not the root, and I'm going to address and enter. Warren and I enter in general different doors, right? Warren kind of looks at the socio-cultural structure and then goes from there to the understructures. And I try and kind of go, let's look at the root structures and see how they affect what happens. So let's play for a second, okay? Here we go. Sexuality. Sexuality. What's our sexual narrative? Now just stay with this for a second. It's very powerful. It's very beautiful. Some of us have played in this arena. Others haven't. But it's wildly important. We all agree that sexuality is a wildly important force, right? I would assume that most people in this room have at one time or another had a sexual feeling. Is that accurate? Show of hands? Anyone want to share? No, okay, we got it, okay. We got the point, okay. So sexual feelings are powerful. Now, to interpret those feelings, we need narratives. Narratives interpret feelings. So the way I would say it is, right, in kind of formal terms, I'd say sex, right, is a state. It's a state. That's what it is. Like being drunk is a state. It's an experience. But every experience gets interpreted. So how do I interpret that experience? Okay, so sexuality by itself means nothing. It's a state. How I interpret that state, right, is based on what narrative prism I put it through. So basically in culture today, just to say it very, very quickly, there are 4 narrative prisms that exist. One of them is really famous. We know that one. We call that one sex negative. Big cultural prism. Church championed it. We know a lot about it. Corinthians 7:9, if they cannot contain, let them marry. It's better to marry than to burn. Lots of text. Every tradition has some version of brahmacharya. Right? In the Jewish tradition, there's a parallel version. Right? There's some version of sex negative. Narrative 1. That narrative is true but partial. Right? Sex is dangerous. It's complex. Right? But that narrative, right, I would say, right, modern culture, we don't go with that narrative. We think it's at best insufficient. Is that fair to say? Right? The classical sex negative narrative, and it's done an enormous amount of damage. Enormous amount of damage, caused, incalculable amounts of shame. Well, then we move from there, right, to sex positive. Now, sex positive is it's the source. It's good. It's creative. It's recreational. It's wonderful, right, which is lovely. But it doesn't quite cut it. Why doesn't it cut it? Because our experience of sexuality is that it's more than just positive. It's more than, oh, I had a good day. I was at the amusement park, right? No. Actually, when sex was had, something shifts. Right? It's more than positive. The word positive is a bland word. Right? It doesn't capture, right, the depth of sexuality. Does everyone get what I mean by that? Right? Sex positive culture. Well, okay, right? But sex is so clearly more than positive. Then you get the kind of Kinsey move, right, which is what? Everyone knows, right? Sex neutral, right? It's kind of like having lunch, butterflies. He did a little research in zoology. Okay, sex, right? There we go. Sex neutral. How many people in the room think sex is neutral, right? Hello, right? Sex neutral doesn't cut it. And then we got sex sacred because sex creates babies, right? Now, just show of hands. We don't have to answer this question, but do it internally. When was the last time someone in this room had sex to create a baby? Okay, I rest my case, right? So therefore, right, the notion of, right, sex sacred because sex creates babies, right, is obviously an insufficient narrative to create a sex sacred narrative. So what happens? And it's kind of shocking. So we've got this new moment in history for the first time in which we live in a culture that doesn't have a sexual narrative. I want to try and get what that means. I mean, the implications of that are enormous. And in the entire Me Too conversation, it's completely ignored. There's no sexual narrative. So we have actually what I would call sex without gravitas. Because what we all intuit is that sex has gravitas. Right? It's weighty, right? It's significant, right? It's important, right? And so we live in a world and we have sex without gravitas. There's no sexual narrative that meets our sexual experience. Wow. Part 2, and there are no distinctions around sexuality that provide any sense or any movement or guidance to how to engage the story. And so we don't quite know what to do. So 50 Shades of Grey is published, has 125 million people read it. Now, all the people that read it weren't kind of perverse, strange women, right, who were trying, it was mostly bought by women. Right? What was that about? Strange phenomena. Right? Why? Why did it become an instant bestseller? The writing sucked, right? The plot line didn't exist, right? Right? What happened? So I'm not going to analyze that phenomena now. That's a good question. I just finished a chapter writing in our phenomenology on trying to analyze that phenomena. But let's just understand something's funny here, right? There's something that's not being named, okay? So at the root of the Me Too crisis is a world in which men and women are meeting. The old sexual prescriptions don't exist. Right? They're no longer considered by the overwhelming majority of the public to be relevant. So there's now, all of a sudden, all the sex-negative distinctions around sexuality are rejected. The sex-positive distinctions are, there's one distinction, consent. And no one quite knows what that is, right? But that's it. Right? The only distinction we've actually left in the space is consent, which is a completely confused distinction that we haven't actually articulated in any potent and powerful way. So what are we left with? We're left with, now just stay with this for a second. Right? Stay with this, right? We've killed all the gods, all the goddesses, except for Aphrodite. Right? Aphrodite, right? Meaning the goddess of love, right? Eros, right? Sexuality, right? Is actually one of the altars at which we still seek depth of experience, right? We still seek, right? A kind of transcendence, right? We still look for or reach for that experience of gravitas, but we don't have a sexual narrative to hold it. Right? So what happens? We have no distinctions around it. So what comes into play? What comes into play is shame. Shame. When I'm talking about shame, I'm not talking about guilt. Guilt is appropriate accountability. I messed up, I take responsibility. Lori has a saying, right, what I want to quote in her name, which is shame is the root of all evil. And she came to that from 30 years of writing and therapeutic experience. By shame, I mean the experience that I'm bad. I'm broken. I came from the factory broken. There's a missing piece, right? And they don't make it anymore. Because what happens, I have this force moving in me that's unbelievably powerful. But it actually undermines my sense of who I'm supposed to be, my social self, my moral self, right? How many people want a picture of themselves self-pleasuring, right, on the front page of the New York Times? Show of hands. Not many. Right? Okay, besides Zach. Okay, besides Zach. Okay, Betsy, you'll work with Zach back there, okay? Right? Now the question is why? The question is why. And the reason is not just because it's culturally problematic, right? It might, we'd have no trouble at the think tank if Zach appeared, but, in other places, it might be more problematic. But it's not just a social problem. It's because we'd rather have a picture of us, I don't know, helping someone across the street, right? Giving philanthropy. Right, showing up as our good and altruistic and wondrous self. But actually, we don't want a picture of our face slightly contorted, out of focus, seemingly self-involved, absorbed. And I could go on with the description, but you get the idea, okay? Right, we just don't want that picture because that's a dimension of self that we actually don't want to share. But actually, here's the funny story. Everybody has that experience of self. They might split off from it, right? They might deny it. They might medicate it, they might lie about it, but actually, this force of sexuality is powerful and gorgeous and running through us and primal and universal. So what have we done? So we've got no narrative of desire. We've got no narrative of sexuality. So the only way we can heal Me Too is an incredibly important phenomena. And with that, I stand with Warren, meaning, right, sexual harassment is out of bounds, period, end of story, no discussion. That's a given. The notion, right, that someone should be able to touch someone else, to invade their space, to speak about them leeringly, right, to invade their space psychically, right, is out of bounds 1,000,000,000%, and we stand in that sense, all of us are Me Too. And we stand with that position as an absolute given in this room, no question, 1,000,000,000%. And now let's go deeper, right? Is there at the source, underneath, are there other things at play? And let's try and find this for a second. Is there shame at play? So men, for a second, right, we've problematized and demonized the essential structure of male desire. I've now collected at this point about 12 different articles written by different people. One of the people is Brad Blanton's daughter. You sent me that article, Zach, Carlise, or something like that. Right? But we've actually problematized male desire per se, and its essential structure is now demonized. Now let's go back to the boy crisis. How do you feel if the essential structure of your desire is demonized? And there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it. There was an incredible incredible movie called Angels in America, right? About, I don't know, how many years ago was it? So how many years ago? It was like 15, 20 years ago. And there's this incredible scene where there's a gay man, a Mormon, right, who's like wrestling with being gay. And it was a play done by Tony Kushner, right, to try and hold the dignity of the gay movement, right? And this gay man says, I wish God would cut me up into little pieces, right? And it just, his sense of intense, morbid shame, right, was so horrific, right? But actually, imagine for a second, that gay man is actually, at this point, every man. It's every man today. Right? Because it's not gay sexuality that's demonized, it's male sexuality per se that's demonized. So what do, right, when we take actually half of the population and we demonize the essential structure of their interiority? Oh my God. I mean, do you understand the devastating effect of that? Right? The shame, right? When the essential structure of desire is demonized? Now, let's stay with me for a second. We all agree that the fact that you have desire doesn't have anything to do with acting it out. That's not the point. That's a given to all of us. So maybe it shouldn't need to be said, but let me just say it in case that's not clear. Of course. But the experience of desire is stunning. And the entire book, Return to Eros, right, is about actually reclaiming the dignity of desire. Now, let's go to the next step. Laura Kipnis, New York Times, round table. They're talking about sexuality at work. Laura Kipnis is a professor at Northwestern. Right, I've corresponded with her. I'm sure you've interacted with her many times. Right? And Laura Kipnis, right, asks this shocking question in the, and I'm going to quote her, not my language, not the way I talk, but I'm going to quote her. Right? She says, well, and she throws this into this New York Times roundtable a few weeks ago, what if the woman wanted to get laid? That was Laura Kipnis, not me. That's her language. But her point was, and Laura Kipnis is always deliberately provocative. If you've read her work, I think I've read all of her work. She's always deliberately provocative. That's her style of speech. But her point was, hello, right? In this entire Me Too story, isn't there any feminine desire? Right? And you're not allowed to say that out loud. You're not allowed to say that without getting shot. Right? But actually, there's male desire, and there's feminine desire, and they're both sacred, and they're both beautiful. And they both need to be dignified. So stay with me for a second. Meredith Chivers is a very important academic researcher, right? Is one of the people who's championed, right, a series of longitudinal studies. There's about 10 different women researchers who've done very important longitudinal studies on feminine desire, right? And the nature of the study is to create an anatomical loop, right? And it's a checking, right, of the woman's internal experience, right, through objective physical measures, right, and her self-evaluation. And the way they did these studies is women were showed, right, erotic visualizations. They were connected to a plethysmograph, was the name of the particular form, the particular structure. Meredith Chivers is a major feminist, teacher, right? And then, right, there was an evaluation of the level of desire, but at the same time, right, the women were also given a pen and paper or a computer to actually evaluate their own level of desire. Now, the gap, and there's been about 10 major studies, double-blind, different universities, all championed by feminist women. Right? The gap between, right, the objective anatomical report of desire, right, and the self-evaluation on the part of the women was vast. Why? And here men need to take some responsibility because we've demonized feminine desire. We've actually demonized feminine desire. And that's happened, right, for a couple thousand years. Right? In one expression of it in the Jewish tradition, it's the powerful sexual woman, sexual intellectual woman in Jewish tradition is called Lilith. Ever heard Lilith? Anyone ever heard of Lilith? Lilith is, how many people have heard Lilith in the room? Right? Lilith is a major figure in the mythopoetic world. I spent, when I was, 15 years ago, checking and tracing all the Aramaic texts on Lilith and writing a critique of the rabbinic tradition, which basically demonized feminine desire. Salem witch trials. Hello. Right? We're deeply connected to a demonization of feminine desire. Right? And feminine desire needs to be actually split off, right, in a whole series of studies, right, in order for women often in the workplace to be taken seriously. But actually what we need to actually dignify feminine desire, dignify masculine desire, always within the parameters of consent, but we need to go even deeper than that. And here's the last point. I don't have time for the last point like Warren, and we both ran way out of time, but let me just make the last point. We'll talk about it in a different context a little bit tomorrow. We need a new narrative of sexuality. So I just want in 2 sentences, I'd kind of offer that narrative. Many of us in the room have worked with this material, right? In the Return to Eros, right? Christine and I spent a lot of time on it, right? Barbara's talked about it in different perspectives, right? And we've kind of spent some time working on this notion of how this is part of the pleasure of homo amore. But let me give you just a 10-second, right, clip in. Okay, so we talked about Eros earlier on, right? So stay with me for a second. This is kind of wildly beautiful. So you've got Eros and you've got sexuality. Let's just notice something. Which was first, sex or Eros? Eros. How do you know? Eros existed in the world for 12 billion years before sex, or maybe 13 billion. And what is Eros? So we have a definition of Eros that we've worked really hard to formulate, and Zach and Christine and I are working hard on this phenomenology where we're working with this material. So Eros is the experience of radical aliveness, moving towards ever deeper contact and ever greater wholes. That's Eros. That's a really good definition, right? It helps in so many ways. But that Eros drives all of reality. It drives quarks and molecules and atoms, right? And it drives the cellular structure, all of that's what Nassim was talking about this afternoon, right? All of reality is driven by Eros, right? So that's why reality didn't stop. I'm not going to stop and be hydrogen. I'm going to keep going, right? So I'm not going to, hydrogen, not enough. Right? And so we go through cosmological evolution, and we go through biological evolution, then we get to cultural evolution, then we go through about 10 major stages of cultural evolution. Oh my God. And this whole process is driven by Eros. So then at some point, right, what's Eros's desire? It's to create larger wholes, right? New wholes. Eros wants to create newness and new emergence. So at some point, Eros discloses itself as sexuality. Sex at a particular point in the world, in the move from unicellular to multicellular, sex appears in the world. But sex is but a disclosure of Eros, right? The interior experience of Eros, Peter, is pleasure, right? And as I move towards greater wholes, it's pleasure. Fragmentation creates pain. Sex is an expression of the erotic drive. All of a sudden, we have a new sexual narrative. Sexuality is based on the evolutionary Eros that drives reality awakening in me. Now just feel that for a second. All of a sudden, we've eviscerated shame. Does everyone get that? All of a sudden, I realize that which is moving in me, which of course needs appropriate guidelines, complete control is essential, discipline is a given. That's all a given. Sexual ethics are a given. But sexual ethics won't take us home unless we have a sexual ethos, right? You can't ground ethics when you have no ethos. And if we don't have a sexual ethos, which means a sexual narrative, which can actually take us beyond shame, right, then the insidious, destructive, corrosive, right, horrific, right, imposition of suffering, which destroys the interiority of a human being whose identity is completely fragmented and decimated because I lose access to my own goodness. Oh my God. So unless we reclaim a sexual narrative, which is based on, right, sex erotic. The sexual is an expression of Eros. It doesn't exhaust the erotic. It models the erotic. We can't move beyond shame. We don't even have a chance at actually approaching Me Too without this conversation. That's just for a start. Thank you, everyone. So we are, Peter, yeah. We're at 8:53.